Hello again, welcome to another episode of the Franchise Everything podcast, where we talk about everything and anything franchising. Today, I'm honoured to be joined by Stephen Giles from Norton Rose Fulbright. Stephen, how are you going?
Right, Glenn. Good.
I mean, we haven't done a podcast or anything before, have we?
No.
So for those who don't know you, I'm sure everyone does, can you just describe what you do in the franchise space? You are...
So we've probably got the largest franchising practice in Australia for probably a couple hundred odd franchisors, but I've just come off the board of the Franchise Council where I served 27 years.
27 long years?
Yes. But I do the industry policy stuff for the FCA as well, drafted all of the submissions to government over the last 25 years probably. All the meetings with the ACCC and Treasurer and stuff, helping Jay Westby, the CEO.
Yep.
So that's my...
So you are pretty much anything that needs to be known about franchising, code and law, you're pretty much the man as far as I'm concerned. So, a very hot button and hot topic at the moment. There's been some big recent changes to the code, particularly to do with return on investment in the code. Can you just describe what's happened most recently and when that change comes into effect? Yeah,
so in theory it applies from 1 November, but a lot of people have chosen to go earlier. Mm-hmm. And from 1st of November, you can't enter into a franchise agreement unless it complies, but people have moved to comply a bit earlier. Essentially what it says is that you can't enter into a franchise agreement unless it provides the franchisee with a reasonable opportunity to get a return on any investment required by the franchisor. So this concept of saying, putting an explicit obligation on franchisors to focus on franchisee return on investment is brand new.
But it was unspoken previously, though, anyway, wasn't it?
Well, I think the market would say, well, we're not going to buy a franchise unless we can think. Yep. But it was then left up to individual assessments, a franchisee reading the disclosure documents and other material, speaking to other franchisees and forming a view. It is a bit tricky in franchising, though, because return on investment for you, for example, with your massive share portfolio, Glenn, that's quite measurable. Like you would know what return on investment is, it's profit. But in franchising, often a franchisee looks at it and says, oh, well, I'll get a salary and I'll be able to employ one of my family in it. I'll be able to income split and I'll make a profit. So pure profit, as it's known in accounting terms, it's not really how franchisees might necessarily see ROI. But I think that's a bit manageable. I mean, what the ACCC has said around this is, look, we're expecting change. So changes to the code have been made for a reason. That reason is that we expect franchisors to take a bit more responsibility to validate the profitability of their business model before they go to market and seek franchisees.
So that should be a good thing for the brand of franchising as a whole.
I think so. And I think it's not a skies falling in moment. But it's also not a nothing moment either. And so those franchise systems that think they can just go to a franchise expo and try and sell franchises when there's no real depth behind that. And I was just talking to Darren McAuliffe at Frandata, and I think the things that he's been doing around objective ratings of franchise systems, if you don't mind me saying, I mean, in the early days, Australian franchising was built on bullshit a bit. There's a lot of selling and a lot of hypothesising about how fantastic a model is. I think where we've moved to now is it's much more about the facts and don't just say it, show me that you can prove it. I think that's a good, healthy thing.
I think overall it is a good thing. I mean, over the years, I've met some franchisors, new franchisors at an expo, for example, who have got one location and they're franchising, they want to go national. And some of it's terrifying. Some of them, some things you hear them say, they've absolutely no idea what they're doing. With a single location and then moving on, and these goals to have 100 franchises in the next 2 years. I mean, just so pie in the sky. If they're so out of whack, I do fear for the franchisees, potential franchisees that they do eventually sell to, because you've seen those. They get to 2 or 3 or 4, can't provide the support that they probably were promised. That's it. So this is probably a good thing. You think this will stop those people in their tracks a little bit and they'll think twice about whether franchising is the way for them?
Look, maybe. I mean, I think there's so much information now about franchising. I mean, when you think about early days of franchising, okay, the disclosure document, but these days you just Google Google search, and if you're buying Acme franchise, you just Google Acme franchise disputes or Acme franchise complaints, and if there's anything negative out there, it'll kind of come up. I think speaking to existing franchisees is always been one of the most important things.
Yeah, that'll never go out of fashion.
No,
yeah.
And I guess what I say to the regulators, and I think it's always important to remember, is it's not all the franchisor's responsibility. The whole regulatory framework is built on what I call a duality of obligation: responsible franchisor behaviour and effective franchisee due diligence. So a franchisee that says, I didn't read the franchise agreement and didn't read the disclosure agreement, I don't think it's fair that they can then say, so please protect me. I mean, I think that there are obligations on the franchisee. Now, that said, we've also, I think we've got to try and simplify the disclosure material, because someone who English is their second language, when they're getting 200 pages worth of tightly printed documents, what do? Now, I think if we simplify it, it will mean it will be less costly. You and I were just talking a moment ago about artificial intelligence, whether there's a role for that to play in helping franchisees assess the sort of the nature of the franchise business.
The key points that are in those documents.
Yeah.
Because you're right. They, for the most part, I'm sure they don't really go through them in greater detail.
No.
And most prospects, or many prospects going in, unfortunately, are less inclined to invest in due diligence, proper support.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that
you see it a lot. I mean, you see a lot of people, and I said it, Bruce Bilson was on this prior to you, and I said, I think people make too many assumptions about franchises. They're getting, well, it's a big brand. It's bound to be good.
Yeah.
And that those assumptions override, even when they see relatively red flag type news.
Yeah.
Those assumptions and those preconceived thoughts about that brand override those red flags.
Yeah, and look, there's some people who should never go into business. I mean, at the end of the day, you do need to have that customer service ethic. And for example, in a coffee franchise, when they've got 250 outlets and your franchise business has not been successful, it won't be because of the system problem. It will be because you're making bad coffee or the people you're employing are not giving good customer service. So it's that self-assessment phase. But the code, if you follow the code process, it's perfect. The question, because get legal and business advice. The code doesn't expect people to be able to read and understand those documents, so it gives an extra process around that. But if you choose to ignore it, then you're creating your own vulnerability, and I don't know that there's much that can be done about that. There's, the FCA's got a franchisees guide, for example. There's a ACCC's guide and things like that. But the other thing is that in a market economy, people are looking to run their own businesses, and they're looking to probably move out, or they can't really get to a level in employment that gives them
whatever.
I mean, there is a bit of a, whatever you'd call it, a glass ceiling, but different demographics would struggle to find those opportunities. So business is their way in. And, the stats are still, for the 40 years I've been in it, the franchisee success and failure stats are still remarkably good. It's round about 2 to 3% franchisee dissatisfaction. That's a pretty good number. And I think Greg Nathan produces some stats which said something like, somewhere between 70 and 80% of franchisees would make the same decision again if asked. So,
which is pretty remarkable considering the number, or I know how many surveys he does.
Yeah.
Does that frustrate you as a person been involved in this for as long as you have in, guiding policy response? Does that frustrate you that franchising gets lumped into this negative sphere quite often?
I think it's just a function of being in a mature market. The mainstream media is not that interested in franchising, really. And what they used to run is stories of expansion. So this network's gone from 10 stores to 100 stores.
This is how they did it.
And those were the stories in every market when it's growing. Now we're in a mature phase. They haven't got those stories anymore. And so what do they run? They run the negative story, and it's always the brand, and it's more challenging, of course. The media, how do they attract people's interest? The more sensationalised the story, the better. So that's a bit frustrating. I think franchise systems have got to move past it a bit. I can't believe the level of complexity. I think the regulatory framework now is just excessively complicated. We've got the most complex and comprehensive regulatory framework anywhere in the world. And it's just got, the pendulum has swung too far. I mean, it's quite bizarre, really, that if you said the 2 or 3 countries closest to Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Singapore, throw in Hong Kong, do not have franchise legislation at all. So they are able to survive without legislation, and we've got this complicated regime. And has it made much difference? I'm not sure.
Do you think it's because it happened once, we brought a code in once, and then it just gets caught up in the normal government cycle and review. It just keeps, and you've got to tinker every single time. So
definitely,
we've almost created this monster that is just ever evolving.
Yeah, we have. And because it's a code of conduct as opposed to legislation, doesn't have to go through any houses of parliament. So if you want to change some legislation,
it's an easier path, isn't it?
So easy. It can be changed on 60 days' notice. And so it gets changed too much, and people are fiddling with it. And they think they're being well-intentioned, but they're adding things for some hypothetical problem. And a lot of the code provisions now are solutions in search of a problem. And I sat down with Bruce Bilson in 2014 when he was Small Business Minister. And he said, listen, I'm on this bent of reducing compliance cost. And I said, well, look, I think you can take a whole heap. And so we took $20 million of compliance cost out of the franchising code of conduct in 2014 with those changes without reducing any protection. And now most of that and more is back. So it's not, with just some common sense, you could take the current code, strip back the actual detailed compliance responsibilities without reducing the protection, and save $20 million a year in compliance costs.
Just stripping red tape out of franchise brands.
Because,
not just making it stripping back red tape, but then those brands could then reinvest in support services, to field services for franchisees, to local area marketing support services, things like that. So they could invest in staff who actually directly impact and help existing franchisees.
Yeah, and you can see that. I think you're in the legal symposium before, right? That franchisors are saying, oh, well, I can't afford to appoint another marketing person because I need an in-house legal counsel. I mean, really,
that is
you shouldn't
ridiculous.
need that in franchising.
Well, I was speaking to a franchisor the other day, talking to him about, because we're doing some stuff on marketing with conversions and recruitment and things like that. And we were talking about video content and everything, investment in that. And he said, we just spent $40,000 with these changes on legal.
Yeah.
He says that just came out of our pocket. We had to get it out of somewhere. Yeah. So it has to come out of some bucket for somewhere.
That's right.
So just for those changes.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, look, as a lawyer, we're great beneficiary of it, I guess. But it's really interesting.
People would want you to stop talking about it and stop stripping compliance out of it.
Yeah. Well, we try and I certainly try and cut it back, and I think there's an opportunity to do so. And I did ask, as chair of the legal committee, I really asked the legal committee to step forward a bit and see if we can just see what we can do to simplify this a little bit.
So what do you see is the future for now? So crystal balling it. So with because when provisions get put in place with an idea for a problem there to solve, sometimes it has ramifications into other things.
Yeah.
For this ROI provision, what do you see the future over the next 6 to 12 months? Is it going to be case law that's going to determine what reasonable return is? What do you see going forward?
So I think the courts will ultimately make sense of it, and they will strip it back and say, because the courts, as a general rule, will not see their role as trying to figure out what the commercial deal should be between the parties. They will say, well, was the person misled, or what did they, were they particularly vulnerable or something? Yeah. So I actually don't think legally it's going to have much impact. But what will happen now is every dispute, you'll have franchise lawyers writing to the franchisors going, oh, and by the way, not only did you not act in good faith, but there wasn't a reasonable opportunity to make a return on the investment.
So they'll throw that out as a scare tactic. Is that to push to mediation or something? Or?
Well, I think it's more litigators and one of the worrying trends in franchising is the increases in class actions or group actions. And often that is funded by plaintiff lawyers actually out there seeking to make money.
And that's happening across society in many areas.
And even litigation funders. And that worries me a little bit.
Yeah, same.
With the vulnerability of franchisors to spurious claims. And I've seen situations, for example, you get one or two troublemaker franchisees, the lawyer gets into their ear, and next thing they go to other franchisees and say, "I'll join this class action. I'll be able to get you." In one case, I'll get you $30,000 and it won't cost you anything, and you won't even have to give your name. So it's a bit like a free tax ticket. And then suddenly the franchisor gets a letter saying, "Oh, we act for 150 franchisees."
I've seen brands get destroyed by just a handful of small franchisees banding together and tearing it apart from the inside.
And the hardest thing is change, really, and extraneous factors. So franchise systems that are in major shopping centres where you don't have control over rent, and landlords will put 30-40% rental increases on. What do you do in those sort of situations? Turns a viable business into a non-viable business overnight. None of that gets addressed. And similarly, just change in the marketplace generally. But the biggest problem that the franchise sector faces at the moment is the fact that auto dealers and their political bodies are just getting actively involved in broader franchising because they think it's an easier way to get legislation to help them.
Through. Is there a path to remove them and separate from them, given they're so different to the vast majority of other franchise brands?
There's certainly, we've been pushing for a while to have a separate auto code. But they don't want it, the dealers. And one of the reasons they don't want it,
to do through franchising.
They can hide behind franchising, right? Because there are two of the auto dealers are listed public companies on the stock exchange. So they're hardly mum and dad businesses. But so they find it difficult to get political support. But if they can paint this as a thing that's necessary for the whole of the franchise sector, they've got a better chance. And a good example is not so much the code now, but they're looking to have a new prohibition on unfair trading practices. And what they want to do is be able to see if they can persuade the government to make changes in that area to give them commercial advantage in their dealings with some of the motor vehicle manufacturers.
Can they trade on Sundays? How's that? How many dealers are not open on Sundays? Is that just a Queensland thing, or is it down here as well?
Don't know.
Car yards never open on Sundays. It must be a Queensland thing.
Yeah.
When you go shopping for a car.
Yes.
Before we finish, you said you just were on a 22-hour flight from the States.
Yeah.
So thank you for being on this. You're a bit tired. What were your key takeaways from the States? Can you just summarise that, especially in conjunction with the regulatory environment we've spoken about here? What are you seeing in the States?
Well, I think the States are going through similar issues, but they have much more of an even-handed approach of saying, look, there's responsibility on both sides here, franchisor and franchisee. And secondly, their regulators are nowhere near as aggressive as the ACCC, and I don't mean aggressive in that, but just interventionist. But I think the US franchise brands to whom I spoke are amazed and bemused about the Australian regulatory framework because they're caught by it when they master franchise into Australia.
Yes, I bet.
And so, I had a situation the other day where a US-based franchisor didn't know that they needed to update their registration every year because you don't have to do that in any other country. Once you're registered, you're registered. They're not aware of special purpose fund stuff. So it's stuff that doesn't happen in the US, which used to be or is the home of franchising. And for them to see a country go so much further than they have, and in a way that they find illogical, they're very surprised. They're also surprised at how quickly our laws change, and how hard. And I think it is having a potential impact on foreign investment here.
I would think, why would you bother?
Yeah.
And especially a market of our size.
Yeah.
There's other bigger markets to go into that are easier.
Yeah, so where are they going? Interestingly, the China-US dynamic's interesting, so they're not going to China anymore. They're starting to look at Southeast Asia. So I did a paper on franchising in Asia Pacific, and the Indonesian and Malaysian regulations were largely based on Australia conceptually. But they've done it in a sensible way that the compliance cost is not as high, and they have ministries where they approve a franchise system. So they actually have vetting of documents and vetting of the business model.
At a government level.
Yes. Yep. Because we don't do that, we've got all these additional laws saying you must make sure there's a return on investment, whereas the bureaucrats do that. Now, heaven help us if you've got if we ever get to that stage in Australia. But it is just interesting to see the dynamics. US, for example, they have vetting as well. So we don't have any vetting. So we've got all this disclosure, and we've got all these, and we've got the franchise disclosure register in Australia, but there's no vetting of what goes on there.
Well, wouldn't it be better to vet at that end, and then it's easier at the other end?
Well, this was where the ACCC was proposing this licensing model, and that's where that came through. And I think, and Jay Westbury and I have been chatting about this a bit, that the concept of having a more simple model where you got a license to franchise, and that meant that you had to do certain things, and you could even outsource the operation of that to someone else, to a third party. That's kind of what they do in the US for the Small Business Act administration of their loan. So, but look, it's one of the things I've learned over 40 odd years in franchising is the sector's remarkably resilient. COVID was a fantastic example, I think, where the franchise businesses that survived
came out shining from
the other small businesses that weren't franchised basically failed.
Because it was an opportunity to really show the true value of a franchise in support, in brand, in IP, in buying power. I think it was a perfect example of it. Excellent, Stephen, mate. We could talk on a whole bunch of topics, I reckon.
Happy to come back on.
That's good fun. Love you to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks. And that's it for another Franchise Everything podcast. Hope you really enjoyed it. We'll catch you in the next one soon.